Holy cow, everybody. If you are on the video feed, there's a slight delay here due to technical issues, but we will be kicking it on right now. Welcome to Man vs. Marriage. If Jeannie Moran, honey, why don't you say what's up or whatever you want to say?
What's going on?
What's going on? What's going on? Yeah, we're back for another exciting episode. And I've already screwed up the beginning because I'm supposed to say in this episode of Man vs. Marriage and then kind of get on with it. But I put the intro in the beginning rather than the middle. But we're going to keep it right here. So this is what you're going to hear today. It's going to be number 3 in our top 5 pieces of advice on marriage. So if you're starting or you're going to get married, a newlywed, or you're trying to reinvent your relationship, these are 5 of the top pieces of advice Jeannie and I would give after 15 years of working on our marriage and soon to be 25 years of being married. Yeah. So before we get started, I want to make sure that you know that you can get in contact with us via email. It's Quincy at MVSMpodcast.com. And you spell my name Quincy. If you're on the audio podcast, if you are here and watching the video, there's going to be some great graphics. Some may say it's the best, but there's going to be graphics right on the screen. Lord. It's going to tell you what?
I said, oh, Lord.
Yeah. And otherwise, I want to make sure you know also now you can get some Man vs. Marriage swag. What I'm wearing today is that Family Famous brand. So you can get things, items like this. Family Famous at quincymoran.com/apparel. And it looks a little something like this. So you'll be there. You'll see actually all the brands that we carry, whether it's podcasting or apparel. So go there, get your swag. Shout out to my buddy AF. I'm just using some initials there in case he listens to the program. He himself has just ordered some gear and he's going to go out and rock it because he's like, well, how can I help you in the show? He's just not comfortable coming on, doing the podcast right now. And I said, well, the best way you can help me, which Jeannie and I have figured this out, is to just wear the gear in public and then give your testimony. And I know it's a very private part of your life, so to speak, when it comes to your relationship, when it comes to your marriage. But I'm here to tell you, if you're a part of this program, it's not just because you want to make your relationship better, but there's something in you that wants to make an impact on those around you, even, just starting with those people that are under your roof. So get the swag, go out, and somebody's like, oh, Man vs. Marriage. I get all kinds of comments. People are always looking. And one lady was like, well, who wins? And I was like, hey, if we're doing it right, we both win because we're on the same team, my wife and I. So go there, order whatever you want from the Quincy Moran, from the Family Famous, from the Man vs. Marriage and other brands that we have so that you can be a positive impact on those around you. Ultimately, you will be affecting the culture where you are. And that is the mission, which is to redefine what role the family plays in society and strengthen that because it's important. And that's why we do what we do. And if you're new to the program, I'm just going to give you a quick synopsis of, what are you getting yourself into? So the beautiful woman on the camera is my wife, Jeannie, as you may know. And we have been married, as we discussed, like 25 years in just a week and a half, which is amazing. A quarter of a century we've been together, which is really cool. But 15 years ago, we found ourselves in a situation where our marriage was not what we signed up for. And what did that look like? It looked like two people who have 8 kids under the age of 6 years old. And if you don't know what that's like, God bless you. It's not a bad thing that you don't know, but that's where we were. We have triplets and twins. So we have punches and bunches, if you will. But there were a significant amount of health issues with our children. 5 of them were born and put on life support right away. And then we have 3 of our 3 oldest children to varying degrees have autism. And then we were having financial duress. We found out that our kids were being sexually molested by babysitters, and it felt like the world was crashing down on us. I mean, even to the point, honey, and you can speak on this if you want, is we were having to get getting fed by the local church that we attended out of a food bank because we were just struggling that bad, and we almost lost our house, etc. So what we took a step back and realized is that our relationship is not exactly, it was not in a place that we had imagined it when we got married, because everybody's got a picture of what this is going to look like. And we had an opportunity at that point because we were living as roommates, not necessarily by choice, even though I believe in being intentional, but just based on the rush of circumstances that came our way, and we were not prepared to deal with them. Nobody else in our family at the time had gone through what we were going through, with multiple births and
no, our family did one at a time.
Yeah, well, I mean, there were some that had twins, but our situation was just different, and yours might be uniquely similar to you as well. But whether it is or not, it doesn't take long to find yourself looking at your marriage and going, what is this all about? This is not what I signed up for. And that's where we were. And so we went to a marriage seminar and we found out just how differently we thought about our marriage. I guess, historically, men rate their marriage higher than women do for whatever reason that is. But I believe over the course of the next, 15 years after we started investing in our relationship, not only did we bring the gap between where we see our marriage and our relationship, but we also moved it up the scale, which is very important. And that's where we bring you today. So what's the point? The point is, if we can do this, then you can do this if you are willing to do the work and you are committed to your relationship. And those two things that's something only that you and your spouse can do. But Jeannie and I are a product of that very thing, the willingness to move forward and, adapt that Ed Milet principle of things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you. Anything you want to say? Okay, well, shoot. I guess I'm getting all the goods today. It pretty much goes that way. So let's talk about today. Today, advice number 3, spoiler alert, it's in the title. But today we're going to talk about sex and what Jeannie and I like to call sexpectations. And oh man, we're boring her to death. Who knew that sex was so boring?
It's not. No, it's not it.
Okay, well, we don't have any sponsors on the show, but if you have an energy drink,
I'm working on it.
Drive it like you stole it.
I'm working on it. It's been a busy couple of weeks.
Yeah, to say the least.
It's just finally, like, when we get to Sunday and we sit down, it's like my body just goes, oh, we're sitting. And I don't have a screen in front of me, and I don't have anything that's keeping my brain engaged outside of conversation. And you're talking, which is great, but my body's like, oh.
So maybe we need to have you typing all my words at the same time. You're an author.
No.
Okay. That's a lot of words.
No.
Well, you need 4,400 words a day for your author deal, right?
I need 5,000 words.
5,000 words. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk through 5,000 words in the next 4 minutes. So here we go. So this is what we're talking about today. And when it comes to sex, there are just things. Jeannie and I did a pre-marriage class, and they covered like how you can kind of, how would you say it? You can hint around that you want to have sex that night.
Okay, so that was one of the things that actually stuck out the most out of that entire class that we did was they came up with like physical signals, visual signals to tell each other, because they were talking about, like, when you're married and you have people, like some people were still living with their parents, and some people were, might have small children, or maybe you had somebody visiting and you needed to like let the other person know. Some people are not comfortable with just saying, hey, do you wanna? So they had used, one of the things that they had said was they used like a bath towel, like a hand towel, and you would lay it on the pillow or leave it on the doorknob, kind of like the college kids do, to let your roommate know, don't come in, that kind of situation.
I didn't know that was a thing.
You don't read novels.
Okay.
But that's, yeah. And so that was one of the things that kind of stuck out for us. The other one was they made a big deal out of, like playing games, and that's where we had a basket for our honeymoon that had like dice and card games and lottery tickets and stuff like that. And really all it was meant to be was like an icebreaker to kind of
Make you a bit more
make you a
comfortable.
little more comfortable, make it kind of silly so you weren't feeling like the pressure of having sex for the first time. For us, it was our first time having sex, so it was a little different.
It was our first time having sex
Together.
together. Yeah, because we,
We had made that agreement when we started dating each other that we weren't going to do anything. We weren't going to fulfill that until we were married. So, not to say we haven't had other experiences. That was just an agreement we had before we were married. But some of the things that they talked about, it just looking back on it, it solidified how uncomfortable people really are with discussing sex with their spouse.
yeah, and it's weird because they're, and I don't know if it's a ploy or what, but just guys talking or whatever on TV or whatever you would see. It's like, guys get married and then all of a sudden they're not having sex, which I guess can be a real thing because we struggled in the beginning of our marriage.
Okay, so my understanding, based on what we went through and things that I have learned in conversation with others, is the expectations aren't discussed. So most of the time, if you're not having the sex that you want to have or the amount of sex that you want to have, it's because other needs have gone unmet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a disappointment there. And for some, it's a punishment because you're not meeting my needs. So why should I meet yours? And for some, it's how do you make that connection when everything else is off? Which for you and I, it worked that way in the beginning, but then we discovered that with physical intimacy being one of both of our top two love languages, we had to shift gears on how we looked at that because what I was brought up to believe and the way that it was portrayed to me by other women in my life was sex was a service. It was something that I had to do to keep my husband happy and keep him from getting it somewhere else. And so with that mindset, I went into it with the thought of as long as you were getting some, we were good. But I wasn't in it with the mindset of what was I getting out of it. And I think that's where the first wire got crossed because I went into it as I had to, not I wanted to. And then it made it even more awkward as we went down the line and started discovering I didn't know what I liked because I never thought about it. It was a have to, not a want to. When it became a want to, it was like, well, what do I want?
Yeah.
I know what I need. I mean, end game, we all need the same thing. But you and I also needed the emotional connection. For me, I have to have the emotional connection for everything to work right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's hard to say because I don't think you work like some guys do. Like you have to have the emotional connection too. It's very big for you. But for some guys, they could just get in, get off, and be happy. I don't know if that's everybody, if it's just a thing to be done like a service, or if it, a have to rather than a want, or if there's more to it. Now, with you and I know because we've talked through this extensively with Rita and with each other over the years of,
Yeah.
A lot of that came from me reading romance novels because things would pique my interest and it would be like, wait a minute, is that feasible? Can we do that? I have no idea. And it's not things that would be like having others in the marriage or having others involved or anything that outside the box. It was just simply, I wonder what this would be like.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very difficult conversation for both of us because at the point that we actually had those conversations, we were what, 15 years in, maybe?
Yeah, probably 12 or 15 years.
And that was a huge turning point for us in the respect of finally talking about things that we grew up thinking were taboo or that shouldn't be discussed or it was just awkward. I mean, some of it came from insecurity. Some of it for me was just things that I never heard discussed. Like, I didn't even get the sex talk. I got the just don't do it. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
That was the conversation. Um, After that, I never really got any advice from anybody that made any sense. I mean, I had girlfriends that would joke around about their sex life or talk about different things that went wrong or whatnot, but I never really had a solid understanding of what a healthy sexual relationship looked like.
Yeah.
And I don't think either one of us really did, coming from the backgrounds that we had in the I mean, my parents' relationship, if you listen to any of my dad's conversation with Quincy, he made mistakes. He knows he made mistakes. So it's not anything that I'm outing that he, wasn't publicly said already. But um that hindered a lot in their relationship. And it gave me a view of something that was skewed, but I didn't know that. I never knew what was going on behind the scenes. I just knew what I saw in front of me. When I finally learned about um, the things that went on in their marriage that caused a lot of the stuff that I saw, I was probably mm, early 20s, maybe, when I finally got like the full story. I knew some things, but it made more sense as to why I was taught the things that I was taught,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
it's hard when you're getting something from someone that you love and respect, but you don't have the full line of context behind it,
hmm
which you're their child, so you're not necessarily going
I
to.
don't really necessarily want all of it, but I mean, I have conversations with our girls. They'll, I have laid the foundation that if somebody says something to you, and I'm just going to be candid, when the kids were younger and somebody said, somebody asked me if I would rather stand in front of a group naked and give a speech or give them a BJ. And I said a BJ. And I was like, do you know what that is? No. Okay. Let me explain. And once I explained it, of course, she's mortified, but it brought out questions that they don't answer in the classroom anymore. And when you and I were younger, we did sex ed. It was, this is a condom, this is what it's for, this is how you put it on a banana, this is what you use for contraception, don't get pregnant, here you go. That was the extent of our class. This makes a baby, ta-da, you're done. For our kids, it was very, very different, and it was short, very short-lived. But they didn't actually set them up for what these terms mean. It's like, oh, well, this means oral sex. Okay, great. But what does oral sex mean? And in the beginning, our girls were very sheltered because of homeschool, and we kept a lot
Yeah,
away from them for the purpose of, I don't want you growing up too fast.
yeah.
I don't want you doing things that are not meant for a person your age. And I want you to have a full understanding before I just give you to the world and let them teach you what they want you to know.
Well, I don't think, I mean, it's a part of science, sex is, but the school really has no business teaching my kid
We didn't let them.
about sex, um, because that's my business and your business as their parent. But those talks are generally that I wasn't had with me, it
Mm-mm.
wasn't had with you, and we had both done some things before we met each other, and some of the things that were that were done with me were I mean, they were illegal.
Yeah.
So, that's I didn't have a great picture of what that was supposed to be. Both of us are chasing connection. And so, kind of what it boiled down to after years and years and years, because we started having more discussions about sex and about what we wanted to try on and, with each other, etc. But there was always this looming thing in my mind, which kind of brings me to what we're talking about today. And it came to a climax, for lack of a better terminology, in 2 episodes that I encourage you to go check out because they're pretty raw. And the episodes are called "Who Decides When We Have Sex," because I think it's very important for a healthy relationship for you guys to understand who decides. Because for me, it was Is it, do I have access? And for Jeannie, it came down to, why aren't you initiating more? So we're both in different courts. We want the same thing, but our approach is different, because when we think about sex, I look at it and go, well, I'm not going to come and take it from you. And you're looking at it going, why aren't you initiating this with me? And I take signs wrong. You take signs wrong. And so eventually we have to come to terms with, let's have an open discussion about this.
Well, we had several things that led up to that, because you had insecurities with your weight and what you were going through with finances, what we were going through with the kids being sick. All of these things led up to us finally having to have that conversation. I was doing the same thing. I had 8 kids. My body didn't look the way it used to look. I had scars and things going on. Both of us were dealing with emotional insecurities. We're both dealing with physical insecurities. And so it kind of scrambled how we thought about things, because for me, in the very beginning, you initiated often. That was like, we got married and it was like green light. Green light. But then Hunter came. And when Hunter was born, there were complications, there were issues, there were things going on that we weren't expecting.
Well, we have to actually roll it back even further, because the first few days of our honeymoon, it was green light. And then there was a situation where on the way home, I'm trying to initiate and things changed. Like, for some reason, you had turned cold, which we've talked about all this before.
Reality shifted. It finally like hit me that I wasn't going home with my parents. I was going home with my husband to my new home. And it, for whatever reason, it just spun my head.
And you didn't tell me in the moment.
I didn't. So
I started feeling,
he felt rejection from it. And that just, I mean, that snowballed a lot of things. But when we got to this point of who initiates, this has been a constant back and forth, because we didn't resolve what had happened.
Now, we had taken some steps to resolve things, which I encourage you guys to do. And let me explain to you how this buzzword changed our entire sex life from a whole. And so with autism in our life, our daughter Kirsten, which it's not necessarily difficult to tear a door off the hinges, because the doors are made cheap. It's not like a real door. But she would have no door, and then she would not sleep. She would get up, go out in the kitchen, and before we would, sit in her doorway until she fell asleep, you could go out in the kitchen and you would see a whole thing of flour dumped in a pan on the oven, oil poured out on the countertop. You would just see mayhem that ensued, which
she was playing.
She
all by herself
was trying to cook. We presume she was trying to cook like mom, but she would get into everything. And there was a fear that she would, because she had already ran out of the house, that she might run out of the house while we're asleep, and being exhausted from not sleeping, we might not notice it. So at first we used just a regular chair and would sit in her doorway as she yelled and screamed and called names and, just the whole gamut. But when she finally fell asleep, as long as you could get up off the chair, quiet, and sneak into your own room and go to bed, then we were good. So Jeannie and I would talk about it. At that point, we were talking about, we would call it 10 minutes. That was our code word. And, so I would go to bed. Jeannie took care of like Monday through Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday I took over so that she could have a short bit of reprieve, because I was, working outside of the home. And so I would be laying there and I would know that we would be in for a long night. And so I'd be laying there, sacrificing sleep myself, because I wanted my wife, I wanted sex, I wanted to connect, etc. And so it'd be like 1 or 2 in the morning, and there's Jeannie. She would come in exhausted, lay down, and go to sleep. I don't even know if she knew I was awake, as I was laying there waiting for her. But then it got to the point where that started to make me feel rejected. Like, how could we talk all day about having sex, and then you get in the bed and you don't even say, honey, I'm tired, let's try this maybe tomorrow night. Like, how are you not considerate enough to, or
Because I was completely exhausted and did not care about anything except sleep. And that's the honest truth.
and it's understandable. I'm just telling what.
Oh no, I know. And it's still it was still rude and inconsiderate because I still had at least the common courtesy should have been given, but I wasn't even thinking of those things at the time. So we developed a buzzword so that when we needed to skip or change plans,
Right.
the other person doesn't feel like, you're being rejected or I just don't want to. And, you know, is so we came up with Rain Check, which works really well for us. It's not something that we use frivolously. It is one of those things where, I think the longest we've ever used it was 2 nights in a row, and after that, it's, well, we usually it comes into a conversation of we need to work something out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we need to work out babysitting, if we need to go for a drive, whatever. We need to figure something out to make this connection work.
We've never gone for a drive to go do it. So
we go for a drive to go somewhere, go to a hotel or something, but
I was getting ready to
not in the car.
I was getting ready to pause the show.
No.
I was like, hey, baby.
Hell no. Mm-mm. Anyway, I'm not going there. No. So we've had, but we've also had to make plans. Just because I think it's important for other people to realize if you've got a chaotic life like we've had, still have multiple people in the house, we have lots of kids. There's always somebody doing something every single day. There's always just a lot, and you can't really get that connection time. One of the things that we had to start doing, which worked out really well for us, was we need to take 2 nights. We need to go somewhere. We use the credit cards to get the hotel points, so we generally will use the free hotel points to work something out. But in the beginning, I mean, we use a credit card for groceries and stuff, so we could build the points in the beginning. But whatever you have to do, if it's the time that's an issue, first you need to revamp your priorities and figure out where your time falls. I think that was something that we had to work out because we used to just stay up. We got so used to it with Kiki. It's just a habit. For me, I'm a night owl. Quincy needs to be in bed because he wakes up at dark 30 and he can get up and at 4:00 in the morning, he can be chipper and ready to go. I am not that person. So we had to find a balance of we need a bedtime. We need to have the kids know that this is your bedtime. This is our bedtime after this time. No more knocking on the door. No more calling mom and dad for questions.
Yeah, and adult children just still can't figure that out. It's infuriating at times.
It's text messages now, but mostly that's because they're driving. But that was one of the things that we had to come up with was before you can get to the point of who initiates and what's the access, you have to create the access and the time, which means you need to look at, are there any rejections? Are there any unresolved resentments? Are there any issues that you have not laid out? Because for you and I, if we don't have the quality time connection, the sex connection, although we have it, is not nearly as strong as when those other things are being met.
Yeah, you can get off, but you won't necessarily be fulfilled and connected.
It doesn't. We've had times where afterwards I would just get up and leave to go to the office to go work, and he would be laying there in bed like, "What? There's no cuddling, there's no conversation, there's no nothing afterwards." So it left kind of a hurt because I wasn't acknowledging the connection side of it. So it felt like maybe the connection wasn't completed. We both got off, we were happy, but we weren't complete.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's kind of one of those things where we had to learn to talk those things out.
Yeah.
Have that time. Don't just get up and walk away. Don't just roll over and, leave the room, or in my case, don't get on your phone. those sorts of things. But as far as the initiation and the access, we had to resolve a lot of those issues before we could get to the point of what was what role.
Yeah, and let's get really practical with this. It's 30, we're like 30 minutes in, but let's get very practical with it in this how. And so one of the things that you can do, which is it's a great tool, is to sit with your spouse and say, how many times a week do you want sex?
That was the oddest question.
Yeah.
We were in a marriage conference when that came out. Thank God we were on the same page, because that could have been really weird.
Yeah, I think, what were you, 3 to 4, and I was 4 to 5 or something like that. Anyway, that's a good place to start. But you also, it's very important, kind of once you establish that, to start the discussion of what do you like. So I was listening to the Front Row Dads podcast years ago, and he had this lady on called Kim Anami.
Be careful.
And I usually, if I hear people talking the way that she talks, I just switch it off, because I'm not, I don't really.
She comes off vulgar if you don't know what you're getting into.
But the very interesting thing was that she started to talk about the connection and how deep it could be, with sex, with your partner and things of that nature. So I sent it over to Jeannie. I was like, hey, this sounds crazy, but, watch out, because there's these words in here that she uses. And Jeannie listened to it. And what it did was, it helped open a discussion for us that we were not having. At least we could talk about what Kim was talking about, and then kind of float out at that, at that juncture of our communication and say, oh, well, what about, or she talked about, or, watch a video with her talking about some of this kind of stuff. And none of the videos that I've ever seen are inappropriate from her.
They're not inappropriate, but if you are sensitive to things like somebody talking about toys or something to that effect, I would suggest listening rather than watching, because she does have some videos further down in her setup where she does show certain, not how to use them, but she does show the toys and what
so
they're
further
for and things like that. So just know that going into it, you might run across something that might be not necessarily offensive, but just might make you uncomfortable. So if you're not one that can see that,
Yep.
you can listen to it. But she makes a lot of, she brought out the aspect of stress relief and certain things that you can do during sex that can actually release specific endorphins for stress relief, which, okay, we all know if you get off, yeah, you've relieved stress. But she's actually talking about specific things that you can do that can heighten an orgasm to make more endorphins for that purpose. Yeah. She talks about things like different things that you do for like creativity. When your creativity is blocked, an orgasm can help with that, because it frees the mind and allows you to go into a space that you don't sit in 24/7. So it kind of allows you to break off some things, I guess. I'm trying to find a way to say it without being as descriptive as she is.
You could just say it, because we have an explicit on there. This is a marriage podcast.
She just discusses different things that intimate sex provides outside of just the emotional connection. Like there's physical attributes for your body and your health that you can provide your partner. And I think that opened a lot of the discussion for us, because at the time we were both trying to get everything healthy and trying to put some things together. We were working on ourselves and our marriage. And it was just kind of like, well, if I could help you with that.
Yeah.
Just by doing, this particular motion or doing this particular act. I mean, it's not hard for me to do that if that's what's necessary. So it opened us to start experimenting with some stuff. But it also opened us to conversations of things that we like or we don't like, things that we would want to try, where, both of us come from pretty, strict backgrounds with like the conversation of sex spoken in churches was at the time was
Yeah.
It's just not something you discuss. It's between a man and a wife, and that's the extent of the discussion.
Which is understandable, but there still needs to be a healthy discussion, at least between you and your spouse, and you figure out how you talk to your kids. But it also gave Jeannie and I, it kind of paved the way for us to talk about our insecurities. Like, I look at Jeannie and she would tell me that she felt insecure about something. I couldn't fathom it because I was a morbidly obese man. I mean, just, over 350 pounds, for the first part of our marriage. And so my insecurities were around my body. And I'm an average man. I'm not, you know what I'm saying? I'm not a big dog
Not hung
downstairs.
like a horse.
No, I'm not. No, I'm average. Um and so, being so obese, and then even after losing weight and the way my skin was hanging, I just was not fun to look at naked. And so I had a lot of insecurities around that for myself. So it paved the way for us to share our insecurities. But then there was something else that was pretty neat, in my opinion. It helped us share our misconceptions we had about each other, and how what we thought would maybe be taboo with us having sex. And, it was like, well, I just thought that you wouldn't be into X, Y, or Z because,
Okay, so we can be candid there. I was worried about bringing up a conversation about toys because in my home growing up, if and these are conversations I heard, not just my parents. My dad had a very eclectic group of friends,
yeah,
and I was always around. I lived with them until Quincy and I got married. So I was always around. I heard the conversations, and 9 times out of 10 these guys never really considered the fact that I was somewhere within earshot. And, I would hear things and it's like, well, if she's got to use a toy, you're not doing your job right. Or, different things that I had heard in friends' conversations and stuff. And I just felt like if I was to bring that up, would that make you feel insecure? Would that be a problem? And because of what I thought your upbringing was and the impact it had on you and the thought process, I didn't know if I like, how do you mention that?
yeah. And funny enough, the whole sex discussion is what brought us. Not only we get rain check as a buzzword, but we also came up with this buzzword called "say it ugly," and then we'll clean it up,
Mhm.
because it's all been through some of the difficulties that surround the discussion with sex. So I think to make it as practical as possible, number one, you guys should be talking to your spouse, because if there's any disappointment in your relationship when it comes to sex, if there's any miscommunications, I mean, I've tried the initiating game, and I tried at the wrong time. So we would have a conversation about, you need to initiate. Jeannie's not a morning person unless we're at a
Mhm.
hotel. Jeannie's not a morning person. And so there were times where I would try to initiate in the morning and she just wasn't receptive. So I would stop everything, just go get a shower, wash off, and be done. But that made me feel a sense of rejection from her. And I just was not timing things right. So you need to have that sort of a discussion as well. And so you sit down and you talk about, well, um, how many times a week do you want to have sex? And, you know, depending on where the number is, we came to a happy medium. We were pretty close anyway. We said our goal is to have sex like 4 times a week. And what does that mean? That means you're being intentional about connecting in your relationship. And so it's very important to be intentional, but also to have courtesy, with your spouse. If things are not going to work out how they're supposed to, it's like, please be courteous enough to tell me if things change. Or, for women, if your body changes at a particular time of the month, depending on how you guys roll out there. But also, when you talk about access or initiation, it's like, give us the playbook. Let's sit down and talk about the playbook and say, okay, well, um, here is a buzzword to let you know early on that I want you tonight. And so that we can have some fun talking about it, and we can get flirty. We can make, we can just, whether it's over text or phone call or in person, where we're sneaking some goosing around, when everybody's around, but we're doing some things just to initiate leading up to when you're going to have sex together. And so you want to be able to discuss these things with your spouse. You guys have to establish that it is a safe place to talk with each other, because you're going to be vulnerable. There's no other relationship in the world to me where you're going to be more vulnerable than being naked in front of someone else. So you want to be able to talk about those things with your spouse as well. And I've got a few notes that I'll go to here, so we can get you wrapped up. So it's when it comes, please go listen to those episodes. Who decides when we have sex? And then we're looking at access versus initiation. So you need to have that discussion with your spouse. Listening to that particular or those particular episodes will help you. How much do you want? How do you want to have sex? Because there are times where Jeannie and I will just get in the routine of doing the same thing over and over again. We both get to, climax,
But you get bored.
but it doesn't, like, you
It's
want to.
you want something more. You want to do something different. Um, we're in the phase of life where there's just too many people in the house, so we can't be as explorative as we like to be sometimes. And so we plan getaways.
Mhm.
And part of that is the build up over 4 or 5 weeks, knowing we've got this 2-day adventure coming up. And the reason I call it that is because we will actually talk over the next 5 weeks of, you know, what do we want to take with us?
Mhm.
Do I need to get something new? Sometimes I'll buy lingerie or something to take that's different, something that hasn't been seen or used before, only because that time is set aside for just that purpose. We're going to go out. We'll probably go to a movie. We'll probably go have dinner. We make plans to spend time together and have a good time, but we build that whole weekend into as much physical contact as we can have. And it's a little more free for us to be able, plus, it kind of opens that conversation over the next few weeks because now you're both on the same page of building something. You're building the anticipation of what's coming. And 9 times out of 10, even if you have a rough start, we usually end up laughing our butt off and having a good time anyway. And it's usually sets us up for like the next few weeks when we come home. We're still on that high of having sex often over the next few weeks and revisiting those things either in conversation or, doing something that we did that we found we enjoyed. It's hard to do when you have a lot of people in the house because you're trying not to be noticed. They're adult children, so they know,
Yeah.
and I don't want them involved in conversation or, we still have a couple that like to be smartasses and bring stuff up at the wrong time, and that's something that we don't allow to be discussed publicly. So
Yeah.
those are the kind of conversations that we've had. What do you like? What do you not like? Do we want to go somewhere? Do we not want to go somewhere? We've looked into, I cannot think of the name of it now. The Ottoman,
Oh, the Liberator.
the Liberator. So we found, if there is a marriage counseling or a retreat or something to that effect in your area, I know it's not us, but it still benefits you
Yeah,
to
most
go.
definitely.
I mean, we hadn't been to one in years, and we went to one, and out of everything that there was like 10 different topics that we went through in the workbook, the one that hit us the most was the sex topic.
Yeah, and
That was just because they were very forthcoming with, be experimental, talk to your spouse, look for these things. And it really did. It got us looking into different things that, we've had surgeries. The Liberator helped bring back our sex life after surgeries that certain positions were not okay anymore. I mean, you had your abdomen cut open. I've had mine cut open. There's things that you have to find a way to work around life circumstances to make sure that you can still meet that need. Because if you do the what I would call traditional thing of just letting it go for the 6 to 8 weeks, and then we'll talk about it and maybe something will happen, you're allowing yourself to put a wedge there, whether you intend to or not. And for us, it was always, we found ways to work around things. So if I wasn't able to, have sex with you, we found other things. We talked about it. We planned things so that when the time came for that to be okay,
Mm-hmm.
we had something in place that took care of whatever concerns we might have, whatever, we don't want to hurt the other person. So we want to find something that's physically accessible. It really, it's whatever you're willing to invest is what you're going to take away from it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And where we found out about that was the One Extraordinary Marriage Dare to Dream seminar. If you don't listen to their podcast, I strongly recommend you do. Tony and Alisia are great. They've been doing this, I think, for over 20 years as far as the podcast goes and marriage coaching. But
Get Your Marriage On is a really good one too.
that's the other one I was going to say is Dan Purcell has Get Your Marriage On. He has all kinds of sexperts on. That's my terminology, not necessarily his. But they have various ways of, working through the lack of connection or the insecurity or things of that nature. So I strongly recommend, like we've talk about what kind of sex you like. Talk about positions. Talk about if you want to use toys. Talk about oral sex. Just work on getting all the topics out there and talk about the things you like. But one of the most powerful things that you are going to do with your spouse is talk about some of these resentments, what we call hard talks, um, to kind of clean your soul out a little bit, because it's really hard when you're feeling resentment and you're feeling bitter towards your spouse because you feel rejected or disappointed, and then you're trying to connect. And I think that has a lot to do, along with some selfishness for either spouse that just tries to get in and get off and get it over with, and not and have no concern about, what their spouse is, if their spouse is going to get any kind of fulfillment out of it. And it became my mission early on to say that I want you to go first before I go, because that's the way I approach it. And I think we both work now. We're more intentional than I think we've ever been, as far as connecting to make sure that the other is getting what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another topic that we've discussed, which is the need versus the want. And so these practical things that we're talking about here, this is one of the best groups of advice we could give you, which is to have that discussion about sex, what we call sexpectations. Because if you continue on with silent expectations, that can really lead to some resentment and some bitterness and a lack of connection. And who knows, that might even lead to you guys, to making mistakes in your relationship. And I don't even know what it's like to come back from something of that degree. That's outside of my wheelhouse. But I think for you and I, it's important just to share, where it is that we've been, and be able to give practical tips to people on how to do that. So what were you going to say?
I think there's a few things to consider here. Number one, if there's an elephant in the room, you need to discuss it. You need to figure out what the wedge is, the resentment, the hurt, the dissatisfaction, whatever that is, the disappointment. Get that out in the open. Secondly, you need to listen on purpose. You cannot listen for ammunition. You cannot listen for the thing, even if it's something that strikes you. If the mention of toys is like, and it's an automatic flinch for you, take yourself out of it. Take yourself out of the conversation and just listen, because chances are it's not about you. It's something that um, it's uncomfortable to discuss sometimes. But if you're not that soft place to land and you don't put down the armor and you don't put down your own discomforts, it makes it very, very difficult for someone else to tell you. These are very intimate, vulnerable things. I mean,
Right.
Quincy and I have literally had these conversations completely naked, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, just for that purpose of there's nothing between us. And it is a literal raw conversation. Um, if you're struggling with timing and you're not getting enough sex, or you feel like there's a lack somewhere, consider a calendar talk.
Mm-hmm.
We had to do it. And I'm not saying, where you literally put it on the calendar and say, well, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're doing blah, blah. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is
There are people who do that.
there are Tony and
Elisa do it.
Elisa,
Yeah.
they do
Alicia.
it.
Yeah.
But for us, what's worked is we do a calendar talk to figure out what does our schedule look like? And then we discuss, can we plan time on these nights? And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have sex those nights. It's just planning our time together. If it leads to that, awesome. If
I'm
it
always hoping
doesn't,
it leads to that.
yeah, well, I'm not saying you're not. I'm not saying I'm not. But I don't want people going into this thinking that just because you're having time together, it means that you have to have sex every single time. That's not, I mean, we've had nights where I just want to shower with you. I don't want the full sexual experience. I just want the intimacy of washing each other and spending time together and nobody being around and just being us. Just being. That's all I want. Those things are things you need to discuss and you need to be open to, because sometimes it's not always going to lead to, the big bang at the end, but it will pay off to building more of that as you go, because now you're meeting these other needs that are necessary. Um, and the other thing that I would suggest is, if you don't feel comfortable having the conversation because you have kids around or what have you, plan a getaway, plan a night away, plan a weekend away, make a drive. Quincy and I are excellent talkers when it comes to, let's just go for a drive 2 hours, 3 hours away, and just talk the whole way there. And we discuss the things that we want to do, the things that we, you know, need to we air everything out in the drive. And then when we get to our destination, everything's already been aired out. Now we can get to our time together. Or if there's things that we're wanting to discuss, the possibility of, maybe I want to try this, or maybe it's great to do it in the car. Where else you got to go?
Mm-hmm.
You
And
can't run. You can't run away from the conversation.
I mean, you can stop it, but it also builds some anticipation about where you're going. And then, I think it's important to know that there are going to be times where you're only going to get 10 minutes. So maybe one or both of you need to just, go.
Yeah.
And it's a 10-minute, oh my gosh, I needed that. And then there's other times where, and Jeannie, I'll talk about it, we'll be like, we want to take our time. We do not want to be in a rush. And that can be hard when life is going on and you have to sacrifice sleep and time and other things. But it comes down to, what are you intentional about? And I think one of the things that is amazing, like I hear testimonies on Tony and Alisia's podcast, one family marriage, or one extraordinary marriage, excuse me. They do sex challenges, like a 30-day sex challenge, and it revolutionizes people's marriage. I think there may be something similar to that with Dan and Get Your Marriage On as well.
Tony and Alisia have a 7-day and a 30-day. And then in between that, they have other challenges, which are for like communication and things of that nature, where it's like they're teaching you how to be intentional on things. And then it leads into the 30-day sex challenge.
Yeah. And I think if you and your spouse can get on the same page about that, that's a great place to start. Because you're beginning something new, and it's important to do. And I'm going to tell you, the stronger your sex life is, the stronger, to me, and the more resilient your marriage and relationship are.
Well, and I think for us, one of the biggest things was I started looking for books. I love to read. I love to learn. Now, I will caution you.
Watch out for some of them books.
That's what I'm saying. Now, be careful with where you go with this, because you could look online, but be careful of your browser, because it may take you to things that you were not planning on seeing. Um, but what I started looking at was, first of all, you need to take off whatever holds you back from being able to read what people say. Eat the meat, spit
Spit out
out
the
the bones.
bones.
No joke. But because there were some books that we've used that were, out there, start talking about weird entities and things of that nature because it's their religious belief. I let all of that go. I kind of grazed over it just for the simple fact that it's not my belief structure. But the physical information, the connective information about, doing certain things, trying certain things, certain parts of it, because some of these books take science and connect it to emotion, and some of them take science and connect it to their religious structure. Take the science part of it and build it so that it makes sense for you. We've learned a lot of things just as far as like reflexology and different parts of the body and what it does to rub a certain part. Your feet, you rub your wife's feet, you could throw her into labor. Who knew? We found it out with triplets. But that type of information for me is something that I look for. Um, I'm not going to lie and say I didn't go and figure out, are there other techniques for oral sex? Are there other techniques for, things of massage and things like that that I could do that would change up some stuff for us so that it wasn't always the same thing? And I found some stuff that we didn't know. Now we do. Good things, not so good things, but you don't know unless you allow yourself to drop that guard and at least consider. Now, we have a relationship where there's no other parties involved.
Nope.
That's never allowed. We don't do open marriage. We don't allow other people. We don't allow other voices in that part of our life. Do we listen to podcasts? Do we read books? Absolutely. Outside of Coach Rita, we do not discuss, and we have not discussed our sex life on the podcast with anyone else and allowed them to tell us what's right or wrong in our intimacy and our relationship.
Yeah, we've determined
This-
our own values,
this
which you have to
is-
do for your relationship as
And
well.
that's what I'm getting to. You need to understand your own limitations. You need to understand what your own boundaries are with each other. And you need to allow each other to explore those things together without the restrictions of um, religious or social constraints that might be hindering you from looking further. You have to be able to kind of make your own decisions based on what you find.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't strike you, if it's not something that makes sense, ditch it. But I mean, we've had to do that where we've had to say, I'm kind of stuck. And I don't want to be stuck. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying our sex is bad. I'm saying I want to try something different. I don't know what different is. And then we give each other the grace to say, okay, well, where do we want to look? What do we want to try? Do we want to look for a book? And we start looking at other marriage podcasts. We start looking at other, therapists that maybe have information out there. We start looking at different games, things. Look, he won't go in one or hasn't been in one, but I'll go into an Adam and Eve store or look at some things and just, I have to be willing to at least look at it to consider, is this an option or not an option? And you have to be adult enough to not be a 12-year-old kid going into this place and freaking out over every little thing that you see. That I think that's probably one of the.
You took me into one of those stores with you.
I did.
You just said I wouldn't go in one.
Well, it's not a place that you would go
I'm
often.
not going without you. But
Exactly. I've gone in with my sister, but we were buying presents for a bridal shower, which was hilarious. But I have the personality that I can go in and if it tweaks me and it makes yuck, I know enough to know that's not my section and move along. Some people don't have the ability to do that. They automatically look at a store like that and it's a sex shop, and they put up this wall that these things are completely unacceptable. Those rules are between you and your spouse.
Yep.
And those rules need to stay between you and your spouse. It doesn't need to be a public forum. It doesn't need to be on a podcast. It doesn't need to be out for everybody. It just needs to be between the two of you. The only reason that Quincy and I share it is because people didn't tell us this stuff. We learned this the hard way. We learned it by coming up against struggles and going, okay, now what?
Yeah.
And that's something that we have learned a lot of marriages go through. And if we could get past that and get to where we could talk freely about it and open that side of things, that's a huge win in marriage when you can get your sex life on track
Yeah.
and in agreement.
And it's not easy talking about things that hurt you.
Mm-mm.
I mean, I've never been a woman and never will be, but I know as a guy, I still have feelings. And if you don't if you don't have some kind of courtesy towards me, not just anybody, I'm talking about you, Jeannie.
Yeah.
Because not everybody has access to my heart like you do. But there have been times where I just feel like you're not considering me in the situation, and therefore it makes me feel like I don't matter to you, and that hurts, which I don't believe that's true overall, but in the moment it really feels like that. So we've had to have some tough conversations about it. And so if you find yourself struggling in any of these areas, we're not asking you to come on the podcast and talk about it, but what you can do is you can email us. And then if you want advice or you want to hear your story in a different version, you can email us, and then we can talk through your situation to keep you anonymous, of course. But if you have some questions about what we've talked about, what questions do you have, and how can we help you further based on our experience? And if it's anything outside of our wheelhouse, we can refer you to John DeBach, Dr. John DeBach. He does relationship therapy. If it is about, sex specifically, he can handle that. Or if you want to find a podcast where you can learn more about it, Get Your Marriage On, perfect. One Extraordinary Marriage, perfect. Those are two podcasts and people that I know and I trust to give you.
We've used their programs ourselves, so it's not something that we're just tossing out. These are people that we have actually gone to their seminars. We've actually gone to their websites, used their podcasts. They've helped us.
Yeah. And so that's where we can, and look, what is it? I don't know. Most recently, when was our last tough discussion? Weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks ago?
Yeah, I mean, outside of last weekend with the miscommunication and hurt feelings, outside of that, I think the hardest one was probably about 4 or 6 weeks.
Yeah. So we still face those challenges now.
We're still going through it, but we're like everybody else, we're in that phase of life where we're coming up against things that we didn't know. I mean, we have older kids. They're making decisions. Life's changing. Our roles in their lives are changing. We're starting to branch out and do new things because we finally have the time to do new things. Becoming an author, it's not as cut and dry as get up and write for 5 hours a day and, you're done. There's a lot more that goes to it and it requires more time. So we are having these discussions of, where do we adjust our time? And it causes crap because we get busy, and much like everybody else, we forget we have these tools. And when it comes to head, we both look at each other and go, we're really stupid.
Yeah.
We know how to do this. We know what we should have done. I don't know why we didn't in the moment, but here we go. And then there's podcast material. Ta-da, you're welcome.
Yep. And so we kind of build that so, you can learn from our mistakes, and would love to learn from you. It's Quincy at MVSMpodcast.com. Anything else? I feel like we got the practical like
I
the
would
practical
actually
side.
ask because this is one of those areas that I don't think a lot of people talk about. But if you have something that you have found, a podcast, a book, a seminar, something that you found that helps in this particular area, I want to know. I want to know what it is because it's one of those things that you can find it, but it's not always easy to find. You find a lot of other crap before you find the good stuff. So I mean, if there's listeners out there that have found something or learned something that helped them have these conversations or help them, maybe try something new or bring about something different on the intimacy and sexual side of the relationship, hit us up. Let us know. I'm curious.
Yeah, because there are some books that Jeannie's gotten. She's like, "Hey, I'm reading this for the podcast," and then I'll read it, I'm like part of the way through it. I'm going, "Lady, you let your dog do what to you? I'm out.
No.
Ripcord. I'm
No,
out of this
no,
book.
no, no, no,
Not
no.
happening." So yeah, it can get. I mean, it can get out there. But with that being said, if we can give you any more practical tips, let us know because we would be happy to do so. What?
Just the tip. I couldn't resist. I'm sorry. There he goes. Look. I made him turn red. I love it.
I'm not red. I'm
Liar.
wearing
I
it.
can see your cheeks.
No, it's just I have to be careful about whatever I say from here on out because once you make one sexual innuendo, everything else is open season.
But I'm good for sexual innuendos, sarcasm, and cuss words. This is why you have me around.
Well,
That's what the E is for.
There's
It's
other
specifically
reasons I have
for
you
me.
around.
Just shut up.
Yeah,
See now who's making the innuendos?
I'm talking about me too. I make the innuendos as well, and then there's nowhere you can go without something becoming a sexual innuendo when it starts.
Nah. They're big people. They can handle it. They're grown-ups. We're okay.
Yeah.
Your 12-year-old is showing, but that's okay.
That's okay. That's all right. Okay, so that's it for this particular episode. I want to recap again just because I like to make things practical, but we're already over an hour. So when I put this guide out, I've got a guide coming that's going to be a little bit deeper dive than the episodes we're doing, just to give you a little bit more. When that comes out, if you want to be a part of it, make sure that you email Quincy at MVSMpodcast.com, because when these top 5 pieces of advice, when the newsletter comes out, you're going to get something that's going to help you, with the practical side of getting all these done. And in reality, it's going to help you keep them fresh in front of you. So it's something that you make as a daily habit or a habit in your relationship. So make sure you do that. And don't forget, check out quincymoran.com/apparel. That's where you can get the goods. We'll have like our Legacy Man versus Marriage, the podcast shirt, a great conversation piece. Then you can look at Built Ready. What does that say? It says not born ready, built ready. And that's you and that's me, because we're building ourselves into be the best version of who we are. You can get the Family Famous brand, which is what this is all driving towards, is to create fame within your own family, and drive legacy through your home. And then, some cool stuff, the Notorious Hustle Mania. You can get all of that at quincymoran.com/apparel. That's where the brand is. So make sure you go and you get it. And if there's anything else that we can do, make sure you email us, Quincy at MVSMpodcast.com. It'll come to Jeannie as well. I used to give out Jeannie's email address, but we have one listener around the world, one listener that will email Jeannie and I both together. Everybody else was emailing me, so I just keep my email address on there and I share it with Jeannie. What are your final thoughts, final words, or is that all you got?
I already covered it.
Okay. I'm doing a great job of not bringing any more sexual innuendos into this, even though it's funny and it's fun. Anyway, that is all for now. She is Jeannie Moran. I'm Quincy Moran, and this is Man versus Marriage, the podcast.